Woodwork Geek back here again. This week, a two-door side cabinet that I use to put all the media for the house. So I get a nice clean wire-free install for the telly. Solid oak with a walnut stripe all the way around, nice rounded corners, and a handle-free clean set of doors. So I start this project off by preparing rough timber. So the first job is to get all of the staples and any cracks or checks in the end of the wood taken out and rough dimension the 8 pieces of oak needed to make the outer frame for the cupboard. After cutting to length, I then take them to the planer and I surface one side, and then I use that flat surface side up against the fence to create a 90-degree right angle corner. So I get two edges on the wood that are perfectly flat and perfectly square to each other. After doing that, I then run the pieces of wood through the thicknesser so that the top face and the bottom face are perfectly in parallel. This gives me 3 sides that are finished and ready to go. After I've done that, I take the pieces to the table saw and I just trim up the last little bit on the table saw so I get all of the pieces the same width, so they're all even and regular. With all projects, this phase of the kind of build is the relatively kind of easy phase, but it's also the more important phase. If you don't have perfectly square, perfectly true pieces of wood that are kind of flat, and when it comes to doing the glue up, everything starts to get out of whack. And here you can see me just trimming those pieces down, and you can see the walnut strip on the table saw there as well, just to make sure that's all right. So there's 8 pieces, so 2 pieces per side, 2 pieces per top, 2 pieces per bottom. And what I try and do when I'm preparing all this timber is make sure that I know which faces and which sides will be the face sides. So when I glue them up, I want the better faces together, so that when the cupboard comes together, it looks as good as it possibly can. This is often overlooked, and people just put kind of pieces together. That doesn't give you the best kind of outcome for your bit of furniture. You're much better off making sure that the grain pattern and grain orientation is the best it can be. Me personally, for this piece, given it's got a walnut strip in the middle, I wasn't as bothered about making sure that the end grain orientation was perfect, because there's a little bit of separation there anyway, and the lengths are quite short. It's only 80 centimeters across and a meter wide, sorry, 80 centimeters high and a meter wide, so it didn't make too much of a difference. Once I've got everything kind of cut and squared down, I then glue it up, clamp, and then here you can see me just taking them out of the clamp, and I'm just cleaning off all the glue from the surfaces, so I can get them put through the drum sander to keep them nice and flat and get rid of any imperfections caused by glue ups. After all the wood's gone through the drum sander, you should have 4 pieces that make up the sides, top and bottom. Those 4 pieces, you then want to find the best piece for the top. So the top of the cupboard is the piece that you're going to see kind of most frequently, because it's the piece that's most on display, especially for me, because this is going to sit in an alcove. So the 2 sides and the bottoms are going to be kind of rarely seen. So it was really important for me to make sure that that top piece was the best it possibly could be. I just trim up here the edges of this just to make sure that everything's got a finished edge. After I've got finished edges on everything, I then move over to the crosscut miter saw and trim to length. The length is one of the most important things, because if you don't have perfectly symmetrical lengths on the top and bottom and the two sides, you'll find it really hard to get a square perfect finish on this particular piece. Once you've got the right lengths, it's then time to finish off the front edge of the sides and the top and the bottom. So the two sides have a half round on each side, so you end up with a semicircle finish. So that's done on the top, the front edge, and the bottom edge of both sides. And then the top and bottom pieces have a smaller half round, so you end up with a radius finished on the edge. After I've sanded the two sides and just removed any burn or small imperfections from the router, those pieces are in effect ready for cutting the mortises. So we're making solid progress at this point. Next piece that I do is to trim the top and the bottom down slightly. So here you can see I'm just working out the offset to take off of one edge. So I take the side and I calculate from the round over on the side where I want the top and bottom to die on that side. So I think on this one I took off 11 mil from the edge, from the top and bottom. And you need to make sure that the edge that you take that 11 mil off is then the edge that you route the round over on that board, because otherwise it's the walnut strip that goes round the outer edge won't line up, and it'll look a little silly. So the key feature of this is that kind of walnut strip that goes 360 degrees round the whole piece, and if that's not done correctly and you don't get a perfect line on that, then it does notice very, very badly. Once you've got these pieces cut, then the next job is to make the tenons on the edge of the two, or the top and the bottom rail. So I use a rabbit bit or a rebate bit, depending on your terminology, and I just make that kind of more, tenon about 12.9 millimeters wide, which just so happens to be the same thickness as the router bit that I use to route out the channel or the dado for that mortise to go in, tenon to go into the mortise rather of the sides. Here I'm just cutting the end of that tenon back because I don't want that tenon to come through the front of the side pieces. So I just knock it back 30 mil or so from the front, so that when I make the kind of dado for the shelf to fit into, the tenon to fit into, it's set way back from the front, so you don't see any gaps or any joints. Here I am marking out the two sides, and here I clamp them both together so that I know that top and bottom I get a perfect channel across both pieces, so that I know that it will be perfectly parallel and perfectly square. So I use a little handheld router for this, put the fence on it, and I just literally make small passes, taking off 4 or 5 mil depth each time, being careful to just go on the center of the two boards so that the ends don't go too far. It takes a few attempts, but you have to drop down, I think it's 10 mil, the tenon that I put on there. So it took, I think, 3 passes to get it down to its final depth. And you do need to make sure that when you're routing that dado or groove in the wood, that you're keeping firm pressure of the fence against the piece to make sure that it can't wander and cause a kind of mistake in the dado line. It's probably one of the most stressful parts for me of the build, because if this doesn't work, then in effect you've thrown away all of that kind of jointing, cutting, sanding, routing that's got you to this point. As you can see here, when I'm doing the dry fit of the sides to the top, they slot in quite tightly. So I tweak the tenons and just sand them back a bit just to make sure I've got a snug fit, but it's a tight fit. Because I'm using a router for both the kind of mortise and tenon type joint, or dado and tenon type joint here, the angles came out perfect. You can just see me here showing the stripe kind of going all the way through. But yeah, because the router was used to cut those kind of holes and everything was dead 90-degree square. So actually there was no tweaking or kind of pulling of the unit needed to get it to be perfectly square. Here I'm just trimming up a piece of wood for the front and the back piece that are used on the cupboard. So it has a front that the doors close against. So the front piece is a lot wider than the back piece, but the front and back piece also get used to hold the shelf in place as well, so that the shelf gets a little kind of adjustable insert on the left side and right side, but also off the 2 middle supports as well. Here I am just starting on the doors. So I cut the piece of wood down to the right length, and then I start placing the wood to see grain pattern and orientation. And the doors at this point were too wide. So I then come back to the table saw and then the jointer just to trim down the kind of door pieces a little bit more to get them to a better size to fit the cupboard door. And here I am again, just checking dimensions. And I think again, I find they're still a little bit too wide, so I go back and repeat that process. Better to cut twice and make no mistakes than cut once and trim off too much. Once I've cut them all down to length again, I then have to reconfirm that the grain pattern is right. So I drum sand off all the marks and imperfections so I can get the best or pretty much final look of what the doors are going to be like. And then I take them to my bench to orientate the grain so that it best matches. And here I'm looking to try and make the joins blend as much as possible. So when you've got 6 pieces of wood, you kind of get a chance to try them in different combinations just to kind of make those kind of patterns of the grain just disappear into each other. Once you've got it the best you can, then it's glue up time. So type bond 3, making kind of care to orientate the boards correctly and use clamps either side of the board so you don't induce a cup when you're clamping it. After you've got these all glued up, then it's time to start the kind of front and back support. So here I'm just marking out and cutting the tenon. So I'm using, for me, a bit of kind of hand tool work. So just use the pull saw to create that small little tenon on the top and bottom, and then clean it up with a chisel so it's as good as it can be. And then mark out the cupboard itself making sure that I get the kind of marks in as clean as I can, and then it's kind of chisel time. So I use a chisel to get the majority of the waste out, and then kind of dry fit the piece in bit by bit, trying to keep that join as tight as possible. I found it quite refreshing actually doing some kind of hand tool work. It's not something I do an awful lot of, so this was quite a nice little change from using all the power tools. For me, I tend to work slowly when kind of hand chiseling out pieces of wood. So the first kind of hole that I make with the chisel is about a millimetre short of the final dimension, and then I'll just gently pare back the hole either side till I get to that finished final dimension. And I find that for me gets me the best kind of fit time after time. It does take practice to make perfect. Like I say, I don't do a lot of this, so I was quite pleased with how these came out. The front was harder than the back on this one because the front's inset um, about 35 mil from the front, I think from memory, 36 mil, something like that. So it's got the kind of little reveal line, then you've got the kind of 18 mil of the door, and then you've got the kind of upright that the door closes onto. This is what I'm doing just now, getting that kind of front upright in the piece, and it took a little bit of time. It wasn't a 5 minute job, this one. Once all of the pieces have been cut, it's then time for dry fit, and I bring all of the pieces together and basically put the whole unit together. So it's a little bit tricky because you've got those two center pieces need to go in before the top piece, and then the top piece has to be exactly the right fit to slot in. So it does take a little bit of coaxing to get this. And I did find that my joins were still just a fraction tight. So you saw me just tidying up one to get it to slide in a little bit better. You can see here that the finish is already starting to show through. Now this is sanded to about 120 at this point. I tend to keep 120 grit in the drum sander. After finishing, it does go up to 180. I didn't take this quite as high as I do take some of the chopping boards and stuff that I've done. A bit of functional furniture at kind of 180s enough for me. Once the dry fit is over, it's then time for glue. So I get out my glue bottle and then kind of start carefully gluing this together. And the tightness of my joints did give me a little bit of trouble. I'll be honest with you. I wish they were a fraction looser because trying to get them in with the glue when the wood had swollen just a fraction proved to be a bit of a challenge. So mental note for next time, you don't want a sloppy fit, but at the same time, you don't want it so tight that there's not enough space for the glue, or the glue swirls the wood very slightly, and then you're fighting to get it together, which is kind of what happens here. And you'll see in a minute the other top piece falls down, and then I end up having to tidy up and clean up the piece of work. So even though I'd done a dry fit, when I had the glue on it, it did fight me just a little bit more. Overall, though, I won it at the end. I got everything clamped up. Those long 1.5 meter parallel clamps paid dividends for this project. After I'd glued all of this up, I then moved on to making the doors. So I took them out of the clamps and then took them to the drum sander and got lucky. The drum sander width was about 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre wider than the finished door. So very convenient for me. I could use the drum sander to do the whole surface. So you see me put the pencil mark on, and then I just keep running it through the drum sander until I've got a nice flat surface across everything. Then come back to the table saw and do final dimensioning. And once I've got the final kind of dimension, I just run it through the planer to get a clean edge. And then it's dry fit on the cupboard just to make sure that they're pretty much where they need to be. I left 3.5 centimeters, 35 mil between the doors, so that you can get your fingers in, and then the back edge of the in center of the door gets a 45-degree chamfer cut on it, so you can just use your fingers to pull the door open. Here I'm cutting the door height, so just so that it fits within the cupboard. And once I've got the heights and widths cut, I then do dry fit in the actual opening. Quick little sand on those cut edges, and here you can see the dry fit happening. So there's door one, there's door two, and you can see the join quickly in the middle just there. And it's all looking pretty nice at this point, and I'm pretty pleased with myself. I just do a quick little trim up just to make sure all the lines are perfect. And after doing this, I then move on to cutting the hinges in, I believe. So I use a Craig jig for cutting the hinges in. So I find this thing is a godsend, to be honest. If you haven't got one, it is well worth purchasing one. It wasn't a lot of money, but it saves a lot of time. So setup for these is now really, really quick. So I just use the top and bottom of the jig to offset on the door. So I know that both doors are perfectly set, and no mucking around. I use the square just to make sure that the hinge is in correctly and level, and then pre-drill for little screws, taking care not to go through the front. And here I think I just put the rebate on. Yeah, so I use a 45-degree chamfer bit in the router, and I do it like that. I then discover that it's not enough, and so I end up having to run the door through the table saw to put the chamfer on, which unfortunately means I have to take off all of the hinges. That's then the doors done, so it's time to build the shelves. So I had a bit of oak butcher's block left over from a previous project, so I cut it the width to make the shelves, and then I tested my bandsaw. So I love this bandsaw, Felder FB510. And here I resaw a butcher's block that is 30 centimeters, 12-inch for those who don't do centimeters, and cut it straight down the middle. And I get within a millimeter kind of deviation. More than happy with that for that kind of depth of cut, that length of cut. That bandsaw is just a beast. I run the cut edge through the drum sander just to tidy that up, and then it's time to cut the shells in. So here you can see me marking it, and I just then cut out the rear kind of notch to then sit down in the shelf. And I again use the bandsaw just to clean that little notch up, and then you'll see me put them into the unit in a second, and they fit snug as anything. There you go. So very pleased with how that come out. The final thing on the unit now is to mark up for adjustable shelves. So there's two shelves in this unit, and because it's a media unit, the pieces of media equipment that go in it might change over time. So rather than be fixed with kind of preset shelves that you can't move, I decided to put kind of the European kitchen kind of fittings, the 5mm holes that you can then put the inserts into so you can adjust the shelves vertically. So I measure everything off the sides, and I do a hole every, I think it's 3 centimeters, 30mm, all the way from the bottom to the top, so that I could have one shelf, I could have two shelves, or if in the future I choose, I could actually put an extra shelf in there, no problem whatsoever. So I mark out all of the holes. I do two on the sides, one on the front, one on the back, all the way around. I use a hole punch just to make sure that the holes are in the right place. I then use what I thought was a nifty little set to cut the holes in the wood, but that kind of depth stop was garbage. I'll be honest with you. I thought it was going to be fantastic. It looked like it was going to be a winning combination, a drill truck type grip on it, but it just slipped. So the drill went deeper and deeper. And to be honest, I was quite lucky that it didn't go all the way through. So I ended up throwing that in the bin, and you'll see in a minute it switches to a circular ring type depth stop, which actually worked just fine. So yeah, don't get fooled into one of those. You can see me doing the front, and there's a circular one. I just use a sander to tidy up after myself, and that is pretty much ready for final finishing. I don't think I show you a whole load of sanding. I think I just give you a quick once over. It did take me a little bit longer than that, I have to say, but here we are on to finish. So those of you that watch my channel will know that I'm quite a fan of Osmos. I use it on almost all my projects. This one is no different. I use Osmos Top Oil natural satin finish, and it gets two coats. So you only see me put one on here, but it does get two coats, and it just gives it a lovely golden finish, and it makes that walnut pop. So when I do this end in a second, you'll see that walnut really stand out. Um, Now, if you've made it to this point, I'm going to give you congratulations. You're 27 minutes in. You've listened to me whittle on about building a cupboard. Fair play to you. Obviously, shelves get the same treatment, doors get the same treatment. Never fail to be amazed the difference a bit of finish makes, and how the wood comes alive with that Osmos product. It starts off a pale kind of beige and ends up a golden brown finish, and it's just, for me, the best colour. You get a little quick demo, so the soft closed doors, bits of joinery, and then it's on to making the feet. So the feet are made out of butcher's block again. It's a bit of a favourite right now, and I put I think it's a 12-degree taper on one side, a 6-degree taper on the other, and then I cut one end flat, and then I kind of cheat a little bit and use dominoes, to be fair. I probably should have done mortise and tenon given how much love I put into the rest of this unit, but by this point I just wanted to get the feet out of the way. I think the feet are fine, but they are a little high. I think if I made them again, I'd probably make them about 2 centimeters shorter. But you live and you learn. The more you make things, the better you get. It came out good in the end. Everyone else loves it, so I'm probably just a little bit tough on myself. So once you've got the angles in, the dominoes in, I glued it up. It's then sanding. After I've sanded those edges, it's then time to get the round over bit. So I put quite a large round over on all of the edges except for the top, which is joined to the cabinet. and then I promptly forget to record any of the footage where I fit that unit to the underside. In essence, it was literally just center the feet underneath the unit, and I drilled and counterbored 4 screw holes and then screwed it to the bottom. The unit itself looks fantastic. I couldn't be any happier with how it come out. Um, it has no back, as you've probably noticed by now, and the reason for that is that all the wires come out the back of this unit, and in the alcove that they sit in, the wires go straight through the wall to the left, and then there's a cupboard underneath the stairs, and the cables come out right behind the telly, and that gives me the ability to create a dead kind of flat wireless wall with all of the AV kit on, the nice big flat screen telly with the Sonos underneath it, with no wires on show. If you've made it to this point, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.